Welcome everybody. This is Amelia Vogler, specialist in energy medicine and your host in the Energy Magazine exclusive interview series. Today, our guest is Bill Bengston, who is a professor of sociology at St. Joseph's College in New York. He is a self-proclaimed skeptic, which I share and have shared or used to share that seat with him. And 35 years ago, started investigating the mystery and power of energy medicine, and today is one of our leading researchers. So Bill, thanks so much for spending this time with me this morning and having this conversation with me.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. So it seems like you and I have similar stories here at the onset, because I came to this work after being plagued with migraine headaches. And my whole entire life, I would end up in the hospital. No medicine could really touch it. It was just a Band-Aid. And then one day, I found a woman named Sally who waved her hands around.
Yeah.
And, I worked with her for a while, every couple weeks for about 6 months, and then noticed I hadn't had any migraines. And
cool.
So 14 years later, no migraines. And I just love to invite you to share a little bit about your story. Seems like, pain kind of drives us and directs us to our work. So I think that'd be interesting for our group.
Well, I came, in a similar way of having a personal experience about a little over 100 years ago. I met a guy who was a psychic, or claimed he was a psychic, and I, being a good skeptic, designed studies to make his effects go away. And unfortunately, I failed. He beat me. He spontaneously morphed into a healer. I was the first person he ever put his hands on to try to fix. I used to have a chronic bad back and was in pain, all the time. And this annoying person put his hands on my back, and that was the last back pain I ever had. And that was, longer than yours. Mine's over 100 years old. And I was left with, this happened. What can I do? Whether I believe this or not, I'm now pain-free and haven't had a back pain since. And so door number one is to pretend it never happened, so to be safe and not think about this stuff. Door number two is to figure out what in the hell just happened. And for better, for worse, I decided to go down the second road and see if I could try to unravel some of these mysteries.
It's just incredible. And so that unraveling, if I'm not mistaken, led you to working with some mice. And can you tell us a little bit about that for preliminary research that you've done that's been repeated and repeated and repeated?
Well, after he fixed my back, both of us looked at each other and said, I wonder what else will work. So I grabbed his hands and I dragged him around and had him put his hands on people and we just observed. So we had no idea what we were doing. I could, at the time, I could barely spell healing, let alone know anything about it. And I certainly didn't believe in this stuff. But I was watching, at least anecdotally, people, all sorts of things were pretty interesting and happening. And it was way past the possibility of coincidence. So some things he didn't seem to be able to be very good at. He wasn't good, for example, with benign growths. They just don't respond. So there's a joke we had that he couldn't do warts. I'm told by people in the healing community that any putz can do warts. You go up to a wart and you go, boo, and it goes away. But he could put his hands on a wart and spend the rest of his life treating it. And the only thing you would have is the wart would mock you, would just say, we got nothing. He simply couldn't do warts. Now, this turns out to be a reasonably interesting phenomenon, because the people now, this is again 100 years later, the people now who learn my system of healing, they too can't do warts. Now that's interesting, you know. So the Reiki people say, well, you Reiki it and it goes away, and the healing touch people say you healing touch it and it goes away, and the Joe Ray people say you Joe Ray it and it goes away. We are the losers who can't do warts. On the other hand, it turns out that there were some really good responses on malignancies. So we're not good with benign growths, but the malignancies seem to go away pretty quickly. So I watched, just don't trust the numbers, but maybe 100 cures of various things, and then just kind of sitting back and trying to figure out what might be the patterns, and could this be coincidental in any way, shape, or form? And the short version is I then started to join him, and then we were doing people together, and we cured a couple hundred extra people. And again, the malignancies in particular were particularly interesting. So turns out the more aggressive the malignancy, the faster it would go away. Non-aggressive malignancies are harder to do than aggressive ones. And we did many malignancies. And then it got, so who cares? I mean, I don't mean to sound callous, but someone comes in, you do healing, and then they leave, and then they're better. You know, after a while, who cares? What's going on there, and how do you make sense of this? So since I'm not a particularly nice person, I don't even like people. I thought, well, how is it that we can use this to try to figure out what is the underlying mechanism? Uh-huh. And it turns out you can't do that clinically. I certainly don't have the head for it. You know, you come in, you do whatever you do, and then they leave, and then they're better. So you told a story of migraines, I told a story of a back. Let's be really skeptical here and say, you know, you were due to have the migraines over anyway. And just by coincidence, when he put his hands on my back, that was the last back pain I ever had. I mean, you rationalize whatever you need to rationalize, but you can dismiss it and say, well, that's possible. You know, that's possible. So you have a stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It's unlikely it's going to go away real quick, but it goes away real quick. Mm-hmm. Was it the hocus pocus? Was it the grapefruit they ate? Was it the vitamin C they didn't drink? Was it the vitamin D they took? Was it, you know, and you can keep going. And no matter what you do, if you do a pancreatic cancer, you go, I've heard this happen before. If you do 10 in a row, it's less likely that it could be a coincidence. If you do 100 in a row, it's that much less likely, but nobody sees the overall pattern except us. Mm-hmm. You come in, you have X, Y, and Z. Hocus pocus, you don't have X, Y, and Z. Okay, it was the grapefruit. You know, you can make it go away. Now, there was a couple things we did that you can't make go away. For example, gangrene. As far as I'm aware, gangrene has no spontaneous remission ever reported. We make gangrene go away. That's harder to rationalize. That's harder to make go away. But it turned out nobody wanted to look at that stuff because it was too much. So after, you know, a few hundred people and being increasingly frustrated because I can't control their environment, I teamed up with a buddy of mine who was a muckety-muck at a university, and we set up the first, as far as I know, seriously controlled test on cancerous mice. And I think, in very simple terms, so my thing is not to come in with a complicated question and come out with a complicated answer. I think in terms of, let's be as simple and direct as you can. Give me a cancer model, experimental cancer model, where everybody knows about it. It's not a secret. It's not a what if. It's nothing like that. And it turned out the most common cancer model at the time, and again, this is, you know, just slightly over 100 years ago. I think it was 111. Yeah, it's about 111 years ago. And the most common cancer model at the time was a mammary cancer. And in this particular mammary cancer, you take a mouse, you inject it with a certain number of cancer cells, and everybody, I mean, everybody in the world knows exactly what happens after that. Over 2,000 publications on this mouse alone. And it turns out that no mouse would ever live a month. Really close, but every once in a while you'd get a mouse living to day 27 or something like that. But no mouse had ever lived a month, no matter what you do to them. And the distribution of death looks like a perfect normal curve. If, for those of you slightly more statistical in thinking, the standard deviation of death was actually only 3 days. So 2/3 of the mice died, plus or minus 3 days of a particular number of days after injection. And no matter what has been done to them, 100% of them die within 27 days, and most of them, as a central tendency, much earlier than that. Makes no difference what you do to them. Radiate them, chemo them, give them vitamin C, take away their vitamin C, you know, whatever you do, we know exactly what happens. And then what I do as a reasonably simple-minded person is I come in and I ask a simple question. What if I inject one variable into that? And the variable is healing. So we inject into that one variable. Other than that, everything is identical in the way the mice are treated. And we inject the variable. And what I expected at the time, was somewhat naive back there, I was thinking of healing kind of like analogous to radiation. You know, so you get there, you go, zzz, 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 you know, kind of a thing, and you can imagine the mice are injected, and then you start treating them, and we, in our all-powerful wisdom, would keep them from ever developing cancer, you know, and all that stuff. And it turns out that's not what happened at all. Instead, the mice grew tumors as they normally grow tumors, no matter how much we zapped them. And they got bigger and bigger. And I, being a skeptic, said, well, look at the mice. You know, it's not working. You know, let's be constrained by the data a little bit. It doesn't work. The tumors are getting bigger and bigger. And I said, you know, we failed. It didn't work. Here's the observation. We can document the observation. And I wanted to call off the experiments because it didn't work. And my heartless friend, who's less of a nice person even than me, said, just do it a little more. And I said, why? You know, we don't believe this crap anyway. And he said, do it a little more. So we did it a couple more days. And then this big tumor that would be on the mice started to open up a little bit, ulcerate. And then I really thought they were dying. And my heartless friend said, couple more days, when I'm screaming, it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You know, we tried it doesn't work. And then the tumor really opens up and is seriously ugly. And I'm screaming, call it off, call it off. Mice are suffering. They weren't suffering. They were clear-eyed, clear-coated, running around the cage, having a good time, except with this ugly thing on them. Couple more days, the thing suddenly implodes. And I mean suddenly. And by implode, I mean, essentially it disappears in a very, very short period of time, and the mice are cured. And cured means, I used to use the word remit, but I got yelled at by a biologist who said, you're not remitting anything. Remission is a temporary cessation of symptoms. You're curing. These mice are cured. And we do histology at all points during this process. They're viable cancer cells. And at the end, there's no cancer anymore. The mice are cured. They're immune to cancer for the rest of their life. And actually, we re-inject them for the rest of their life at intervals, and they can't get cancer anymore. And so this became reasonably interesting. At this point, I've done these experiments in various permutations, I think 18 times. I think I've done it in 6 different medical schools, 4 other independent biolabs, and I'm very conservative in what I say, so I don't say anything unless it have independent replication in multiple labs, because I don't believe the stuff, it won't stop. So we've, at this point, done those questions and these questions, the other questions, and all that other kind of stuff. But the phenomenon is reliable. It does not conform to what I want. And it's extremely interesting. I mean, if you're a therapist and is thinking about this clinically and/or experimentally, and you have a patient, whether it's on 4 or 2 legs, I actually call humans uprights, because if you're treating an upright and they come to you and they say, I have a tumor, well, you don't want the tumor. If you have a mouse, you don't want the tumor. They always grow tumors, always. Healing turns out not to be a preventative of cancer. Rather, cancer, the cure for cancer, takes on a natural course. And part of the natural course and the stages of a cure, whether you're talking about animal, vegetable, or human, follows a particular pattern, which is a reliable phenomenon, and it includes the growth of a tumor.
Fascinating. And
I was having a conversation. I was at the University of Washington a couple of years ago, and a couple of people had been invited in to prattle about whatever research they had. And there was one researcher from MIT who was a researcher on alternative medicine as well as artificial intelligence. And I was lamenting even then that I could never stop the tumors from growing. And she looks at me and basically says, well, you're an idiot. Tumors are therapeutic. The last thing you want to do is get rid of a tumor. The tumor is the body's defense against the cancer, and it's part of the curative stage. And my jaw just dropped, because I don't know. I can barely spell healing, let alone cancer. And I don't know what the stages are. I can just say observationally, healing isn't magical, and there are identifiable stages that various cancers go through, whether it's in animals or humans, that it's a real phenomenon. I say this as a card-carrying skeptic.
interesting. There are a couple of things I heard in there that I want to ask you some follow-ups on, just about the process. When you were talking, I was visualizing somebody, holding his or her hands around the side of the cages of the mice. But yeah. I'm wondering, what is it that you think is being exchanged? In energy healing, we talk about energy, and I'm wondering what your definition of energy is.
Well, I don't think there's any energy involved at all. I used to way back when, and I have an old book called The Energy Cure, which is somewhat ironic at this point. And when the publisher said, we want to call the book The Energy Cure, I said, I don't think there's any energy. And they said, thanks for your input. They didn't care what I thought. But out there in the world, I'm aware that there's people talking about energy healing. It's not holding up. I'll give you a couple of examples. One, distance isn't a factor here. And I'm not just making that up. I'm doing this through control studies. So and everybody that you say distance doesn't matter nods their head and says, yeah, of course it doesn't matter. So regardless of school of thought of whatever healing you're coming from, people go, yeah, we can do it at a distance. Mm-hmm. Now, just by saying that, you've negated energy healing. All energy, by definition, diminishes as distance increases, and it does so by a very simple formula. So if I'm shining a light at you and I move away, I can easily map out how it dims over distance. Mm-hmm. If I'm talking to you, the sound dims over all energy dims over distance. Healing doesn't diminish with distance. Now, tell me how then it can be energy. It's something else going on. So the very, and again, there's other ways to do this, but it's not energy. It's not energy. There may be energetic secondary signatures. There may be energetic secondary correlates, and that I don't deny at all. But the healing itself is rather much more likely to be informational than it is energy. So if you look at energetic correlates in for example, physical space, and I've got a bunch of experiments on that. But if you look at energetic correlates, something happens in the room when healing goes on. I mean, there's no question something happens.
Right.
So something happens in the room. And if you look at brain correlates, something happens to the brain. But I think it's a mistake then to say it's the brain that's the producer of healing. I think what we're seeing is effects in the brain when healing happens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we have toys to play with brains, you know, because people think brains are important.
Right.
Contrary to if you've met some of the people I've met, but people think that brains are important, so they have toys to measure brains. So I've done EEG studies, I've done functional MRI studies, I've done all sorts of things because we already have the toys to play with the brain. I would bet a nickel, well, maybe 4 cents. I don't know if I go to nickel, but I bet four and change cents that if we had toys to play with kidneys, we would see it in the kidneys too.
Yeah.
But there's very few people who think of kidney healing, gallbladder healing. What kind of a healer are you? I do spleen healing, you know, I mean, but you'd probably see correlates in the spleen because I think you're changing something in the organism with healing, and as well as physical space in the vicinity. And therefore, if you're measuring an energetic change, then you're thinking that healing is energetic. It's not energetic. It's a disturbance that has energetic consequences.
Mm-hmm. That I can understand. That makes sense to me. I'm also wondering about, it sounds like the frame in which you arrive is a very Newtonian, everyday, here, let's measure it, let's see the effects of this thing on that thing and the difference. And what do you think the conversations around different sort of quantum laws have, you know, where did those conversations fall in your research?
I think the quantum jargon that's been thrown around is completely misused.
Mm.
In fact, I commissioned a wonderful article, the use and misuse of quantum jargon, that you can get either from Edge Science magazine and or the Journal of Scientific Exploration. And the short version was that this is the backstory to it. I was on a think tank at Columbia University, and a bunch of people were sitting around thinking. And one of the people who was supposed to be sitting around thinking kept using the word quantum, you know, until almost a homicide almost happened, but it didn't. And I was having breakfast with Bob John, who was he's gone now, but he was at the time the former dean of engineering and applied physics at Princeton University, and a quantum physicist, you know, and we were sitting, and he was my vice president at the Society of Scientific Exploration. I'm the president, and Bob and I were having breakfast, and I said something along the lines of, if I hear the word quantum one more time, you know, a homicide may occur. And he goes, I think I'm going to commit it first. And I said, we need an essay on the misuse of quantum jargon, because quantum is basically, it's a matrix algebra. He said, yes, it would be very important. And I said, well, guess what? I just volunteered you to do it. And he said, why me? And I said, well, it's pretty simple. You're a physicist who's a quantum physicist as well as a rocket scientist, and so it should come from you. And he goes, yeah, I guess so. It's a beautiful thing. And the bottom line to it is this: people use quantum weirdly, because they're not thinking algebra or anything like that when they're saying the word quantum. What they really mean is connection. And there's another term that's thrown around, which I think is a misuse, and that's entanglement. No. Healing is not entanglement. Entanglement is a one-directional process where if you become entangled, you're entangled. Healing is not a one-directional process. Healing is rather, I prefer a term, and I prefer it because I made it up, but I prefer resonant bonding. Resonant bonding is a multi-directional process. And essentially, I'm trying to say the same thing. Healing is a connection. If I am resonant, I think healer and healee are resonantly bonded. And it's not that I just think it, I got a boatload of experiments on that too. And so something happens between healer and healee, regardless of distance. There's a resonance. And I have some reasonably detailed data on this. But that connection can also unconnect. So a healer and healee become bonded, and I'd rather call it resonance and entanglement, because if you're entangled, you can't unentangle. And then there's less. And everybody has experienced resonant bonding. On Monday, you love your dog. On Tuesday, you hate your dog. Now, what changed? It's not the dog. It's the same freaking dog. But you love the dog Monday and you hate the dog Tuesday. On Monday, I'm attracted to the dog. On Tuesday, I'm repulsed by the dog. Healing is attraction, and you could call it love, but it's also temporary, hopefully. Otherwise, we're really screwed. But the healing, the act of healing produces a resonant bond between two physically separate bodies. That's not speculation at this point, at least to me. That's not quantum. That's not quantum anything. And quantum is on finally getting your question. Quantum is on extremely, eventually I get there, but quantum is extremely small stuff. Photons and this, and there's entanglement that has been linked for even a bunch of molecules at this point, but not as big as a mouse, not as big as a person, not as big as, like that. So we're using it quantum metaphorically. I think it's used metaphorically, looking to link up to something that has higher status. So if I say I'm doing quantum things, it sounds legitimate. You're not doing quantum things.
Where do you see the sort of the more mysterious aspects, or that, very subjective word love that you brought in around the connection between the healer and the healee? Where do you see that folding in your perspective to these conversations?
Well, I hook up people to all sorts of gizmos and then, stick them in cages and do things like that, and then see what happens to them. And I can tell you, and, you can go and look at publications if you're seriously geeky. I can tell you that at least I have to do a disclaimer here. I don't know comparative healing. So I'm not a healer. I don't play one on TV. And I also don't know what I don't know what Reiki really means. I know, that it's a healing thing. I don't really know what healing touch is. I don't really know, I don't. So I invented a healing technique. It's not magical. It's interesting. And I'm reasonably good at the one I made up. And one really unknown area in research is comparative healing techniques. So this is untouched as far as I can tell. People are running around defensively showing healing happens. I mean, who cares? It happens. Why is it that healing touch people, I'm making something up, can do warts and I can't? And the people who learn my technique, who are healing touch practitioners, lose the ability to do warts. Oh, that's reasonably interesting.
Yeah.
On the flip side, they can do cancer. Now, if you don't put that in a hierarchy and just look at that as different stuff, there are differences that need to be investigated, because these are clues as to what's really happening. So I'm no good at, this, and this, and other techniques are good at those. I am good at the other, and the other techniques aren't. If you were a good clinician, as opposed to someone like me, if you were a good clinician, you would know the difference and when to apply what.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're doing Bengston, you don't use that on certain things in certain circumstances. So far, not a good outcome. You would use, this, the other, and the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting to see and to get to have a conversation about this sort of what I might call the other side of curative potential.
Yeah.
In terms, and I really have appreciated the definitions that you're using around curing and healing, are quite different. And, I found that very interesting.
Yeah.
What about, can you speak a little bit more to the resonant, what did you call it? The resonant
bonding.
The resonant bonding, like just in terms of distance healing. Can you give us a little more information about what you're seeing in that space, or if
Sure.
some.
I'll give you a couple of EEG research pieces and then functional MRI research pieces. And they were all involving resonant bonding. Let's say I'm the healer and you're the healee.
Okay.
And I hook you up to all sorts of fancy EEG stuff. And this stuff is hard to do. This takes, if you're really doing high-end stuff, you can't do that in a half hour. So I hook you up and I place you someplace at a distance, and somebody hooks me up, and I use it's a technique called cycling. If I use the technique called cycling and think of you, we can watch what happens to your brain and my brain. Mm-hmm. And so I've done studies with EEGs where we sample every 500th of a second by 38 leads. This is, if you do the math, that's a serious database. And what you'll see is, and this is a reliable phenomenon, is that our brains go into resonance, and there are bispectral cross correlations all the way up and down the frequency lines. Basically, our brains are locking together. Now, you don't, maybe if you're a pathological sensitive, the people who can't screen stuff out. If you're a pathological sensitive, unless you're a pathological sensitive, you're not going to be walking down the street going, oh, damn, there's Bengston again. He's hooking up to my brain. You won't know it at all unless we had fancy equipment to try to tease it out. But there's a reliable phenomenon where there are literally hundreds of cross correlations which occur when I cycle and think about you. We've also documented EKGs, but that, they go into resonance, but that's old news, from HeartMath and all those folks. That's what I would call resonance. That doesn't mean a conscious awareness. I mean a linkage of two entities on many levels, very different in the conscious mind. I don't think healing has much to do with the conscious mind, incidentally. I don't think that the part of us that we're aware of is particularly relevant to healing. And I'll give you an example of that. I did a series on functional MRIs, multiple series. And again, I need multiple labs before I'll say something out loud. So I did these at the University of Connecticut Medical School and also Thomas Jefferson Medical School, functional MRI series, where we tried to synchronize functional MRIs. Too complex a problem. But we can hook you up, and these are the maps that you see of the brain, and this part lights up and that. But I wanted to see if there was a dedicated bundle of neurons that was related to healing and or cycling. And so we could turns out we could toggle on and off healing intent and cycling intent. And so it worked in a functional MRI, but it had no dedicated bundle of neurons. It floated. So it would start, and then if you watched over time, toggling healing on and off, it would start to, and then it would go here, and then it would go here, then it would go here, then it would go. The brain was turning on and off. It just wasn't doing it in any particular, you don't have a section of the brain devoted to healing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That talked about too in terms of like the non-local mind.
Yeah. Yeah, distance doesn't matter. The conscious aware doesn't matter. Now here's an experiment we did in the functional MRI, which is, I'll get you some idea about how little the conscious mind matters. Line in a functional MRI closed, and you have a hand sticking out, and you'd get volunteers, and I was one of the volunteers, but other people using my method. Same thing. We'd get into a functional MRI and stick your hand out. And then we had prepared in advance pictures and hair samples of cancerous animals that were done by a vet 600 miles away. And so we had opaque envelopes inside opaque envelopes so that it was really blinded. And in some of the envelopes, there was nothing in there but an index card. And in other cases, there was an index card with a hair sample on it. Double blinded. I'm sitting inside the functional MRI with my hand out, and someone would come along and drop an envelope in. I know nothing. I'm just hanging out in the functional MRI. My brain turned on if there was a need in the envelope. It didn't turn on if there was no need in the envelope. Now that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not a pathological sensitive. I'm actually closer to being a brick. But I'm not, there's a continuum. So I'm not a pathological sensitive. I'm pathological, but for different reasons. And so I had no conscious awareness other than somebody was putting stuff in my hand. But my brain turned on if there was a need. And the animals were cured, but that wasn't the point of the experiment. And it made no difference who it was. Anybody stuck in the thing doing the cycling, their brain turned on if there was a need. Now that's interesting.
Yeah.
No conscious awareness whatsoever.
Yeah, that is interesting. It kind of brings me to just be curious in my own experience here, just the difference between consciousness, conscious, unconscious, semi-conscious, subconscious, just being curious about all the other parts of our consciousness that could be contributing to the resonance that you're picking up on between what you're holding in the envelope. And
I think I'm reasonably confident at this point that healing is not a conscious activity. We do it consciously, or some people do it consciously, and some people have the egomaniacal thought that if they pay attention, they're better. Like if I am focused on my client, patient, whatever the right term is, I'm better. And I would suggest exactly the opposite, that the less you pay attention, the better off it is. And I think this has to do with, well, I mean, it's similar to any mastery of any skill. If you learn a new skill, whether it's walking, you're a little kid, or you're learning a backhand in tennis because you're a big kid, or whatever it is that you're doing, you're focused at first, but mastery involves becoming mindless. So unless you have a problem with walking, you mindlessly walk.
Right.
But you spent a whole bunch of time paying attention to walking and falling a lot until finally there was a sudden phase transition where you can't imagine not being able to walk. And if you walk mindfully, you look like an idiot.
Right. Right.
Because a mindful walker is either someone with a problem or someone asking for a problem.
Right. That's so interesting.
Same with healing. Get out of the way. You don't matter.
Yeah. And I know in Healing Touch, we have one of our core principles and foundations is to basically get out of the way and to go into that space of no mind. And I've been running these healing clinics virtually because of the need for creativity in this space because of the COVID crisis, and have been treating 40 to 60 people at the same time and finding the results to be extraordinary. And there's no way my mind could consciously and focus on one person at a time, but it's very interesting to listen into a space that's bigger than a singular focus. I'm also beginning to understand better just around your perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you're really looking at, you know, what is happening and not how it's happening.
I'm looking at both.
Okay.
I'm looking at both. I need to know the mechanism of action. I need to know the stages. I need to know all of these things. You know, all of that is going on as we speak in multiple labs around the world. So I've got a reasonably robust research agenda going on.
Interesting. So what do you think, Bill, the difference, or maybe not the difference, but the idea of intention? You know, what's the place of intentionality, just in terms of focused mind? But what's your perspective around using intention, like Lynn McTaggart's work in the Healy and healer relationship?
I think we confuse intention with attention. And I don't think you could isolate any point that you have an intention. So I don't know when I'm intending or doing anything or making a decision where the decision came from. If I decide to pick up a pen and put it down, I don't know when it was that I had the intention. But if I have the thing up, there is an intention that happened.
Right.
I don't need to get all worked up over this and attention, you know, and get all crazy and, you know, nutty over this. It's just I'm picking up a pen. I intended to do it. I don't know where it was. I don't know when that happened. I don't know anything about it. I don't need to now really pay attention to picking up a pen. It's the same thing with healing. If you have your hands around a cage, you've already intended. If you're attending to that, then you're getting in the way.
Say more.
So if I get up and I start walking, I'm intending to walk. I don't know when I intended to walk, but I don't attend to my walking because that would be mindful. And mindful, if your conscious mind, which I pejoratively talk about as a pea brain, your pea brain doesn't have a lot of juice to it. The real you has a zillions of times more juice to it. If the conscious mind has to walk, nobody knows how to walk. They just walk. It's too complex a problem. Nobody understands really how anybody walks. It's too complex. But a little kid can do it. You don't need to study walking in order to walk. You just walk. You don't need to study healing in order to heal. You can heal. Now that's too simple, but when you attend, and if you think you have some magical formula to heal, we diverge in our path. When my healing techniques aren't sacred. They're not true. They're nothing like that. They're gimmicks. They're all gimmicks.
Interesting.
And the gimmicks are to get you out of yourself and just do it. So with some pressure, I was talked into writing a healing manual. I don't have one with me, I don't think. Or I'd show it to you. It's a business card. And on one side of the card it says, be playful. And on the other side of the card it says, avoid ritual.
Interesting.
That's the whole manual. So I'm trying to write a revision and try to make it shorter, but so far it's hard. So right now I'm still stuck with 4 words: be playful, avoid ritual.
Well, I love the idea of being playful, because it, as you spoke to earlier, that there may be a component of love interacting within this work. That playful really brings us out of our minds. They say, you know, if you're in your mind, you can't be in your heart. And I think there's some great wisdom in that.
Wisdom is past my pay grade. I just get stuff to work.
I'd love to switch gears just for a minute and talk a little bit about the article that you published in Energy Magazine. And, you know, as I was reading that article, I was remembering the studies of the monks who had been chanting into water, for centuries, or the research that the Institute of Noetic Science has shown around the increased potential of, adding sort of an energetic frequency to chocolate after it's being prayed for, or like this pillow here. One of my early mentors this is all made of organic cotton, used to tell me, to kind of charge up the pillow, leave it post-surgically with my clients to allow that the healing, the love, the charge, the information to just sort of leak out of the organic materials. And so I was just
now let me just interject something real quick. Let's say you've charged your pillow and it works, and so whatever, there's something that is a serious indicator. I would recommend that you never try to do the same thing twice. Because if you think following this set of rules will produce the same effect, then you've lost the playfulness.
Oh, I agree with you completely, because at any time if I was to work with this pillow with somebody else, it would be just new mind, new moment, we use the word intention, because and the intention is always highest good, which means we don't know what the outcome is going to be, release from outcome, we don't know, but letting the whatever I use the word wisdom, the wisdom of the information that is being charged in here, just kind of do its thing. But I was so excited about this, the idea of encoding this information in, and just was curious if you could speak to your curiosities, speak to how that study came into being.
Well, that study that was put in Energy Magazine is in a long line of research around a particular problem, and the particular problem is, how do you make healing conventional and scalable? And as long as people are running around doing individual treatments, there's an inexhaustible supply of people in pain out there.
Right.
So let's say and I don't care what the modality is. So it's healing touch, it's Reiki, it's my stuff, it's same plot. And so there are classes in this, and then let's say everybody graduates and they're wonderful healing touch people, and that those people in turn teach more other healing touch people, and they teach, and there's still an inexhaustible supply of people in pain. And it just in a crude sense, for the level of efficiency, it's not a great system. So the question is, how can you bottle it, store it, reproduce it, and scale it? So we know, for example, that mice who have been cured can't get cancer again. What's changed in their biology? Well, it turns out we can take those mice who can't get cancer again and take their blood and inject it into another mouse with cancer, and it'll cure that mouse.
Wow.
Now that means there's storage,
right,
of information. So how do we harness that, whatever that is, and scale it up? So you can see a vaccine, something along those lines. And so mice can cure other mice. We've stored healing in cotton. And cotton, and this goes back to the great Bernie Grad at McGill University in his original studies in the 50s and 60s of a healer, Oscar Estebani, holding cotton, and the cotton working as a surrogate. Well, I've done a boatload of those, just taking it up a notch or two. So I have the blinded studies are treated cotton, untreated cotton, and then we put cancer cells near them in a dish. Well, it turns out the cancer cells genomically change if they're near treated cotton, and they don't change if they're not near treated cotton.
Incredible.
And it's a reliable phenomenon. Now, if we look at the cotton, and I've even taken it down to the level of an electron microscope, I'm crazy. So I've even looked at it under an electron microscope. I can't find any changes. But cancer cells can tell that it's charged. And it turns out it's life in need that is the instigator of healing.
Mm.
It's not you as the healer, it's life in need. So if we take cotton, charged cotton, and we put it near normal normal cells, nothing happens.
Mm.
But if we wound the cells, they respond, and if they have motility, they'll actually swim towards the cotton.
Wow.
Life in need is the driver behind healing. So we can store the stuff in cotton. We can store the stuff in water, and this also goes back to the great Bernie Grad. We can store the stuff in water, and I give you an example of an experiment. Treated water, just straight treated water, cycling and all that stuff, fed to cancerous mice that I haven't met, will cure those mice. So there's something in the water. Now, the questions then become, does it dilute? How long? Blah, 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 blah. But once again, we look at the water, and there are interesting changes, but not enough to explain the phenomenon.
Mm.
If water could charge water, it would be a self-replicating system.
Right.
We've done experiments in a cell culture medium. So the stuff in which cells are grown, in a lab.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of treating the cells, we treat the medium, and then the medium is shipped to a lab, and then they grow cancer cells in the lab, in the medium. So you have cancer cells being grown in treated medium and untreated medium and all that kind of stuff. Well, it turns out cancer cells respond to treated medium dramatically. And what happens is you have a dramatic increase in their growth, and by the order of 600%.
Oh.
You don't need to do statistics on that. So if cancer medium has been treated and you throw in some cancer cells, nothing happens the first week. In the second week, the growth explodes and they become wildly happy. Now, if you're treating cancer in a dish, who's your client? It's cancer.
Yeah.
What does cancer like to do? Grow.
Yes.
And we enhance the growth of cancer. Now, if we put it into a mouse, it collapses because it's going to go to the higher order need.
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, extraordinary.
So we've stored healing in mice. We've stored healing in water. We've stored healing in cotton. And what else can we do with this? Well, I got a whole series now. We made a very, very fancy experiment at IONS, actually, in Dean's Faraday cage. And we hooked up 38 different kinds of detectors inside the Faraday cage. And we had 3 people, including myself, who were just inside the detector, inside the cage, treating cotton. And we ran all the detectors. And we recorded something. And we had all sorts of fancy equipment in there. I mean, this was over the top. And we had a recording that we reduced to a WAV file. We played that WAV file, and there's no sound. We played the WAV file to cancer cells in a dish in an incubator, and there's 68 genomic changes which occur to the cancer cells.
Wow.
7 iterations, 68 genomic changes, a reliable phenomenon. By a recording. We published that in a biology journal. Another one we do with mice, and we play the mice, cancerous mice, the recording. Spleen weight of the increased 800%. I mean, these aren't subtle things that are occurring.
Wow.
We had changes in white blood count. We had changes, and and again, publish this in a traditional journal. Now, the next step we have is to take it to survival and see whether this recording will cure mice. If it cures mice, now think of the scalability potential.
Yes.
What if we upload the recording into the cloud? We would have a downloadable cure.
You'll have a lot of pissed off pharmaceutical companies.
Well,
Sounds wonderful.
I don't, but it becomes interesting, but that's what I mean by storage.
That's interesting. It's very interesting.
And if we can, and we've also tested this, it seems to be pretty good also on fixing things like Alzheimer's. So we would have a downloadable cure planet-wide. And if you don't want to have the condition, don't have it. If you want to have it, enjoy. You know, I'm not trying to save anybody, but at least now you have an option of having it or not having it. You decide. That makes it scalable. The piece in Energy Magazine was, can we take water, which we've already tested, and clinically it works. So people have used treated water for non-localized stuff. So for example, on leukemias, on gastric problems, on all that kind of stuff. And we've done it experimentally in the lab on mice. Something happens to the water. Is there any way to juice up the power? And that's what the Energy Magazine thing was. And so we tried experiments with involving succussion and dilution on water itself. And at certain iterations, something special happens that is at this point very, very, very curious to me. I don't know, but it's along the same lines. How many different ways can we have a scalable system and make it global?
Yeah, it's Bill, your work is fascinating and so important, and coming at such an important time, you know, as we're watching our societies globally, you know, battle this virus, and wondering, you know, what are the other possibilities out there for that need of healing, and that need that maybe, I don't know, maybe is following the you know, our lines of evolution, the pull of evolution, like what's pulling us to be more of who we are is something that I'm hearing that, you know, wasn't spoken, the potential for our positive changes. So Bill, thank you. This is just extraordinary. And I just love to give you space before we close. Is there anything else that you'd like to make people aware of in your research, or share a little bit about where you're headed next in your work?
Well, if people are interested in the data and or learning how to do it for themselves, there's a lot of information. I have a website, just bengstonresearch.com, and there are upcoming workshops and events and studies, and this thing that was in Energy Magazine just came out of the volunteers playing on the website. So there are community forums of folks who have taken workshops with me, and they're all around the world, and they share information and experiences and stuff with each other. And if you're looking to volunteer in an experiment, we have more to follow. I have many, many, many experiments in the pipeline.
Thank you so much, Bill. We'll make sure to get some of that information out with the recording of this video. And
sure.
I just want to thank you so much for such a great conversation. Your work
Thanks.
is so interesting, and I can't wait to learn more with you and alongside, you know, I'm such a data geek. So this is really illuminating and thought-provoking, and
yeah, if you want, if you go to bengstonresearch.com, you know, Margaret's put a bunch, I don't know, she's maybe 20 articles or so, I don't know, I have many more, but she's put some stuff up there, you know, the geeky shit that nobody reads.
I'll be there. Thanks a lot, Bill.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon. Give Margaret my love.
Will do.
All righty. Take care.
See ya.
Yeah.